Hi, guys. Welcome to the first afternoon session today in track 3. 10 quick steps to disaster. Once again, if you haven't had him yet, this is Mike Weber, so give him a nice round of applause, please.
So we want to talk about some things you can do wrong. And I want to focus on some solutions more than on the disasters because everybody has done them. It happens. And so there's a lot of things that you can easily do that will cause you trouble with Nagios. I do training for Nagios and I do consulting. So I see hundreds of different setups every year. And some of them are fabulous setups and work with people who are really skilled, got great ideas. And some, not so much. And so it is important that what you do is try to solve the problems that could be on the horizon to make sure that you don't have issues. So let's look at a couple of these. First of all, objects. One of the most important things that you can become good at is understanding the relationships between objects, host checks, service checks, host groups, service templates. All of these objects are interrelated, and it's important that you understand these interrelations because you will be asking the question from time to time, I thought I changed that. Where is this configuration coming from? And it's because of the relationships between objects. So as we look at these objects, where are they coming from? And you can see that there is object inheritance. In other words, just because you have a service check, there is stuff getting pushed to that service check. Now in Nagios Core, you're going to be less likely to make mistakes simply because when you write your configuration files, you make a reference to a template. You recognize that. Those of you who are using Nagios XI, you use a wizard, you set it up, and you don't really see where stuff comes from. And it's easy to make serious problems not understanding where those things come from. So object inheritance is something we want to look at quickly to show you how things are related. Objects, when they're inherited, have priorities. There is a listing. If you have one object and then you add another object, those priorities, the first one's going to have priorities over the other one. Local settings are going to have priorities over service templates or host templates or settings in another file. And so you need to understand those relationships. Objects can be chained together. In other words, you can take a number of templates and chain them all together to create one configuration. Also, you can have objects that you create. Let's say that you have a service template, and it can be incomplete. In other words, I'm going to show you an example. The only thing it has is an icon. Maybe it only has one setting you want to push to all your Red Hat servers or your Debian servers or your Windows servers. And that's all it does. So it's an incomplete object, but you can use it, chain it, bring that inheritance into your system. You can cancel inheritance. Just because you have a template up above or down below, a template up above that is trying to push something down, you want to use the template, but you don't want to use everything, you can cancel parts. And I'm going to show you how to cancel some of that inheritance. Or you can append the inheritance. In other words, if you had a local setting that said, okay, this network group is going to get notifications, you could have a template and append from another object and say, I also want another group from that template. So working with these templates and working with these objects to get this all to work correctly is part of the major goal to avoid disaster. So here is an example of Yahoo. Say you're going to monitor search engines. So here's Yahoo, and you can see in this we've got a lot of different options here, and this is 2012, by the way, if you're looking at this from an XI perspective. And so let's look at some of the objects that are related to this if we set this up. The first thing that we're going to see, it's a host, of course, and we have a template that is connected to this host. So you can see XI Wizard website host. So this template that you see, XI Wizard website host, it has settings. It's pushing them into your host. And so one of the things to think about is whenever you create something, and again, this is especially true in XI, it's going to be using templates. You need to know what templates it's connected to so you can evaluate, are these the settings I want? Here's another example. This is the host, and you go to look at host groups. There's no host groups. It's not in a host group. Is that correct? No. Look closer. See the search engines? The search engines is grayed out. This is one of the newer features in 2012. So it's been set somewhere else. That's what we're looking at here. And so here is the indication, hey, it's not in any host groups. You can get fooled by that because you don't realize that it could be set somewhere else on the system. And so 2012 is trying to help you see that by seeing that grayed out example. And sure enough, there's the search engine group, and you can see Yahoo's in that group. So you might have been fooled not realizing that there are settings coming from that are getting pushed into your template, your host that we have there. Now in XI, and this is also true of 2011, the icon's orange instead of blue, but you click on that, you can see the relationships. And they've done this for a reason to help people think about the relationships between other objects. So if you're ever in doubt, just click that info icon, whether it's a host or a service, and it will show you the relationships that it has. For example, relation to contacts, entry Nagios admin, relation to host groups, it's in the search engines. So if you would have looked in the host management and saw that there was no connections, you would have maybe been fooled. But Nagios is trying to help you out saying, hey, look, you are connected to another template. So settings are coming from those situations. This is probably the most important thing that you need to think about. If I could tell you anything that will save you time in terms of management, it's this principle. Local settings always take precedent over any kind of inheritance. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have decided that you want to monitor 100 search engines. And so you use the wizard to set up those 100 search engines, or in Nagios Core you set that all up, and you put in those local settings. In other words, in the host management, I have my check interval set, my retry interval, my max check attempts, my check period. I've placed all of those in my local host setting. And I've done that with 100 servers. And then somebody says, oh no, we don't want to check at 5-minute intervals, we want to check at 7-minute intervals. Guess what? You got to touch every one of those systems. Every one of those files. You got to open it up, change it from 5 to 7. You can't push that from a template because it's local. It's at the bottom of the line. So the importance here is if you want to manage a large group of servers or anything that's similar, any kind of devices that are similar, so Windows servers, Linux servers, SQL servers, MySQL servers, Apache web servers, anything that can be in a group, start thinking about managing it with a template, because you can place the template up above it and you can change all 100 servers with one click. You want to change the time check interval? One click. You want to change the check period? One click. You don't want to have to manage these each individually. So Local, anything that you set in the host or in the service itself, it cannot be overridden by a template. It's there, and you're going to have to touch this file in order to change it. So beware of that, and again, this is especially an easy trap to get into with XI. But same thing can happen with Core, but XI, it's an easy thing to get into. Priorities. So if I have multiple templates, and you can see I have the XI Wizard website host template, and then I have another template which takes priority. The first one takes priority. So if there is a setting in the first one, and there's a setting in the second one, and it's in the same category, the first one's going to take priority all the time. Local takes priority, and then the first one on the list will take priority. So order your list here when you chain these objects together. If you have multiple objects, specifically and carefully order them, and you can pull from multiple templates if you have to. Here is an incomplete object. In other words, you can see down here in the corner, I'm pushing out Red Hat image. So I got a Red Hat server. I want my people to know, hey, Yahoo's running on Red Hat. I don't know if that's true, but that's what it looks like. This is the only thing I'm pushing with this template. It's the only thing. I don't have to fill out miscellaneous settings, alert settings, check settings, common settings. I don't have to have anything else in it. I can use that template any way I want to. So this gives you the freedom to build templates to do specific tasks. So you can build those templates, use them for wherever you need to. So building templates is going to be solving problems for you, so that you don't have to touch boxes time after time after time. And you can use your time better in a different way. Object inheritance, here's an example where you can cancel inheritance. Let's say that you want to use this template for a Cisco switch, for example. You want to use the settings that are in that template, but there's one thing you don't want. You don't want to use the parent. So if we use this switch, what we see is here's Yahoo, and we're saying you're connected to the Cisco switch. Well, you know that's not true. You still want to use the template, but you know that the connection is not correct. And so this is going to be a curse for you unless you solve this. So you can cancel the inheritance. You can cancel parts of what templates are trying to send. So see this little null here? This null will allow you to use the Cisco switch template, but it's going to cancel this parents setting. So it's important to understand that is canceling inheritance. So now you can see Yahoo's over here and not under the Cisco switch. But you can also use additive inheritance. So with additive inheritance, you can see here, this is the plus. A lot of times people don't even realize there are 3 options down here with a lot of your templates. So additive means that you're going to have multiple situations. So if you had a local setting for a contact group, with additive inheritance, you could add another contact group to it. So typically, the local settings take precedence and will not allow you to push anything else. But here, additive is going to allow you to append to your situation. Contacts. So there you can see you can add that by using the additive inheritance. Okay. So the first thing we looked at is really coming up to speed on objects. In the talk that I'm giving next, I'm talking about objects, and I'm going to take the class through setting up host and service templates so that you can do one click and add 100 or 1,000 servers in 5 seconds. Very quick, very efficient. So this was just to give you some ideas about how templates and objects work. So now let's talk about another thing. All of us know bad things happen. All of us have had lectures about backups. I had one of the students come to one of my classes. He said he just got a job, and we were talking before class started, and he said, yeah, I got this job because the guy before me, he was in charge of pushing backups to a remote backup site. Pretty good-sized organization. He had that job for 7 years. After 7 years, there was a disaster in their data center, and they asked him to retrieve a backup. He retrieved yesterday's backup, and it was no good. He retrieved the backup from the day before, and it was no good. He had 7 years of bad backups because when he set it up, he'd made a mistake. That's why he lost his job. That kind of stuff can happen to us. You make mistakes. And you can hear all the stories about backups, but it really is important, and it's probably more important with Nagios than anything else. You know how many hundreds of hours you can put into your Nagios configuration. You cannot afford to do that all over again. It's not a pleasant experience. So, backups. You need to have backups. Hey, you need to back up before you do an update. Before you do an XI update, before you do a Nagios Core update, hey, think about having a good backup. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to see problems, but you need to save yourself some agony by having a backup that you can restore quickly if something goes wrong. It's just basic stuff. So, here's an example. Did you know that Nagios XI is already backing up automatically for you every day? It's doing that because of a script, 2 scripts that are set up by default in the root, that's the root user, scripts directory. It's auto MySQL backup and auto PostgreSQL backup. They're running at 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning every day. Now, they're being placed in store backups MySQL daily, then it goes to weekly, monthly, etc. So if you have XI, Nagios has tried to help you out by doing these backups. Interestingly enough, I have seen people's backups and they're 0 bytes. You need to see that those backups are actually working efficiently. That is an important aspect of what you're doing. So that is part of your responsibility. This stuff is automated, but you need to make sure that it's working correctly. You need to know how to restore your database if it gets hosed. It's something you need to practice because it's going to happen. I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to happen. Now, automated backups are good. That's just one thing. But this is a backup that I recommend. It's a modification of what Nagios did. I push this in all my classes. I push this in all the consulting I do. This is a different kind of backup. What this is doing is creating a timestamp backup, for one thing. But you can see, this is an XI backup. You can modify this and it works fine for core. You shut everything down. You turn your databases off. You want to make sure that you get a backup because nothing is locked. You want everything to work perfectly. Notice that it's creating the timestamp, and here it's pushing into a directory, the BK directory, which is different than the store directory. So I always tell people that come through my classes, hey, take this, do it once a week. This way, if you have a total disaster, you can reinstall Nagios, dump this in there, and you're up and running. This is almost a bare metal backup situation. All I have to do is restore the OS and Nagios, and you're good to go. But this is the kind of thing you need to think about before an upgrade. If you upgrade Nagios and something goes wrong, what are you going to do? I mean, you got 3 databases, 2 MySQL and a Postgres database, and you got all kinds of things happening rapidly. You need to be able to recover quickly. With this setup, you can recover probably in 5 minutes. Restore everything back to where it was. So just a basic backup is going to be important for your future. Here's a core backup. Same kind of thing, timestamps, and what we're picking up is that USR local Nagios directory. Maybe you've got PNP for Nagios. Those are both directories that you want to collect. Now, of course, if you have MySQL, then you're going to have to back that up as well. Okay, backups. Encouraging system warnings. One of the biggest places you can save resources on your system is pay attention to those warnings and get rid of them. Let me give you an example. Here's an example from the event log. No check time period defined. Oops, I just installed 50 servers and I forgot to define the check time period. So I'm going to see bazillions of these. These don't stop Nagios. You guys all know that if you run the pre-flight check, Nagios checks to see if you have errors and if you have warnings. If it has errors, it won't restart. It'll tell you, hey, you got an error in this config file on this line. But if you have warnings that says, hey, you have 27 warnings, you need to do something about this, but I will restart. So what do most administrators do? They restart and say, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. But think about this. Think about the resources you're using. When you have warnings, it's designed to be telling you something that you should fix. In addition, it's writing to logs, it's rechecking and rechecking and rechecking. It's doing all this stuff that you're ignoring. And you should be paying attention to this because you can gain a lot of resources out of your Nagios server by paying attention to the warnings. So what do you do if all of a sudden you created 50 hosts and services and you're just getting those kinds of errors? Don't even think about clicking on each one and fixing them. Build yourself a template and fix it all at once. So here you can simply create a host group, and then you create a service template, contact group, all your check settings, alert settings, all that stuff you want to change, put it into a template, and drop your services in there and solve it in 5 minutes. Don't go back there and touch every one of those machines, because if you want to change it, you go back to the template and you can change them all, one click. Use the templates to solve your problems. Again, templates. This is going to help you in management. It's going to make you more efficient. It's going to save your tail. Use your time more efficiently. So use these templates to manage your problems as well as setting up your management possibilities. So, for example, here's a service template, and we want to fix, you don't have check interval, check period, any of those things. Set them up in the template and push them out. If you have to set up 2 templates, it's a whole lot quicker to set up 2 different templates to push them out to different hosts than to go and click on each one of those services and host files to make those changes. Your alert settings, maybe you want to change your notification interval to 90. Set that stuff up, use your templates, solve your problems with templates. Put them in the host group, and then you can drop your hosts in there, and you're good to go. So use those templates. Here's another example. In this example, I saw eventually over 100,000 total records, 100,000 warnings. And it was easily solved by setting up a template. Well, this is actually solved by just changing one thing. But you can see that these numbers, they just keep growing. So one of the ways to tell something about your system is go to the event log and say, okay, how many warnings do I have? Count those warnings. How many pages of warnings do you have? You shouldn't have any. You need to fix those problems. That's why you're getting them. So clean them up and save your resources to do something else with Nagios. There's the check that was a problem with this is modifying max current check attempts. Okay, mangling users and contacts. They actually are different. There are two things that you have to recognize in Nagios. There are users. Those are the people who have access to the web interface. They all can have different permissions. Users can be different than contacts. Some users maybe don't get any notification information. But you have to understand in Nagios, there are users and there are contacts. So let's look at an example. There's an example of several users on an XI system: Fred, Joe, the Nagios admin, and Sue. So Bob is in the management team. Bob, he's not too bright with technology. Bob's not a guy you want to be clicking on stuff. Bob likes to click on stuff. Bob likes to experiment. Bob is not the guy you want to have administrator rights. Bob is placed as a user. Bob can see everything. Bob's happy about that. Bob doesn't know it, but Bob can only read things. He can't change things. Don't let Bob have access to your system. Bob's going to cause you a lot of work if you do. And you're going to be sad, and you're not going to like Bob. Give Bob the right permissions. And you guys all know, you've all been through this. There's always somebody that wants to see, and they've got ideas, they want to experiment. It's a Nagios server, it should be a production server. Give them a test box. Let them destroy the test box. Put it in a virtual machine so you can clone it and rebuild it every day. Bob gets access. But don't let them have access to the production machine. Nagios has provided you all kinds of resources to limit that access. So when Bob logs in, you can see there's Bob. Bob, the first thing he does is says, hey, I got all this stuff. This looks good. I've been reading on the internet. I've been reading all about Nagios Core. I've got some great ideas to do with this. And sure enough, first place Bob goes is, hey, I want to check and change how the disk works, but Bob has no actions. Bob has limited tabs up here. Bob is just going to be seeing stuff. And that's important because Bob is a disaster and he'll never, ever change. Now, Fred is an administrator. Now, notice with the administrator, you have a number of levels you can work with. You have the option to allow an administrator to see everything and then have only read access. But you also have some other levels here. So if you want someone to have complete access to change, restart the system, make any kind of modifications, do all the advanced things, then these are the settings that you would give an administrator. Now you can see, they can see all hosts. Of course, if they can't see anything, it's going to be kind of discouraging logging into Nagios. It's nice to see something. But here, reconfigure the hosts and services so they can change those. Control the hosts and services. Now notice there's a couple options down at the bottom. Can control monitoring engine. In other words, they can restart the Nagios processes. And so there may be times where there are people you don't want to give that access. And it also has this option for advanced features. And one of those advanced features is when you go to the service check, for example, you can type in a text addition to the command. You can modify it right there in some of those advanced features. So you can turn that off as well. But make sure that people get the right permissions. Here you can see that this guy's got all of the options. He's got the advanced. He can configure things. He can reschedule. All of those options are available. Now in Nagios Core, of course, you're doing all this in the CGI.cfg. And so here, for example, authorized for read-only management, and you can see management up above. They can see services, they can see hosts, but all they can do is read. So you can see this is how you would set up something similar for yours in your Nagios Core. Notice commas, no spaces. If you put spaces in there and try to restart Nagios, he's not going to like that. So just a tip. Just put commas in there and don't put any spaces. But this is the file, and this is all determining web access. That's it. This is only who can get access to the web interface and what they can do on the web interface. Now, contacts has the same thing. Of course, Bob mistakenly was put in as a contact because you really don't want Bob to know what's going on other than what he can see. But you can see, you can manage Bob's alert settings, miscellaneous settings, all of these kinds of settings, multiple email addresses, et cetera, et cetera. So the contacts will get notifications, and the users is really determining access to the web interface. Now, the contacts is also where you set up your escalation levels if you wanted to escalate, for example, from the Nagios admins, and if they can't handle it after the fourth notification, for example, then it goes up another level, maybe up to another level. So notifications is also something that happens in the contacts. Monitoring non-existent ports and switches. This is probably the biggest resource waster that occurs with Nagios. And here's what happens. You go to monitor a 64-port switch, and you've only got stuff plugged into 32 of those ports. What happens to the other 32 ports? Well, it sends a critical message because it says that port is down. Why is it down? Well, there's nothing connected to it. But the worst part about that is it sends a critical message, and because it's critical, it sends it more often. Instead of checking every 5 minutes, now it's checking every minute. So there you've got 5 times the resources you're using. It sends notification. You're wasting resources sending notifications. And guess what? Nobody's reading them because they're not fixing them because they know that it's down. So this is one of the biggest ways that you can waste your resources on a Nagios server. So I'll give you a couple ways to fix that. One is to use admin down on your ports, and I'll show you a modification that you can do. This is a lot of work. When you tell your network guys, okay, we want to do admin down on all of the ports that we're not using, they're not going to be too happy about that. But you know what? It makes a big, big difference. So if you don't want to do that, the other thing you could do is you can turn off monitoring on unused ports, or you can remove the checks. I don't think you want to keep running them. They're just worthless to you. They're just sucking you dry. They can be sucking 30% of your resources depending on the network infrastructure that you have. So let's look at the first option. So this is a switch, port 11. So we're monitoring, it says it's down. Well, it just doesn't have something plugged into it. We're also monitoring bandwidth. Bandwidth is the most expensive monitoring option you have. When you monitor bandwidth, usually these kinds of checks take somewhere around 10 seconds. They take a long time because they're evaluating data against new data to try to create the graph and all this stuff. So these are expensive checks. And you're using your most expensive checks on stuff that doesn't even exist. So you're checking port status, bandwidth, sending notifications, and ignoring notifications. If you send enough notifications, you might as well turn Nagios off because nobody's paying attention. I mean, this is a problem. So you need to do something with those notifications. So here's one option. So change everything to admin down that you're not using. Modify this check IF Opera status plugin. This is what's being used to monitor your plugins or your ports. And change this warning state for admin down to an OK state. That then, what that does is creates this situation. It's administratively down, it's OK. So it's checking that, but because it's in an OK state, it checks it once, waits 5 minutes, checks it again. If it was a situation where it was critical, it checks it once, then immediately checks it the next minute, the next minute, the next minute, the next minute. It just keeps on going, and you're just throwing away your resources. So this is one option. I know that it is tough to turn those administratively down. I know that's an issue. Here's another option. Disable the port checks. Now, the bad thing about disabling the port checks, you can see down here, it's going to kind of skew everything in your setup because it's going to say, hey, these are disabled, but it's kind of like a blemish on your statistics. And so if you can live with that, okay. But here's an example. Turning off 790 port checks saved 1.5 gigabytes of RAM, reduced the load by 18%. I mean, it's going to be different based on your hardware, et cetera, but there's some significant savings for your setup with these port issues. Okay, here's another problem. Encouraging non-accountability for changes. Now, this is really a tough one. You come in on Monday morning, the Nagios server is hosed. Somebody's changed something, and nobody wants to admit it. And all you want to know is, what did you do so we can fix it? But they don't want to say anything because they know they really screwed up bad. So here's an example. I got a call from a company. They're in a major crisis. Their Nagios was hosed. Nobody wanted to admit it. And everybody had the same password to the Nagios admin, so it was kind of tough. I mean, you could start tracking IPs, et cetera. But the problem was the person that went in had read this great tutorial about how to take this Nagios Core plugin and apply it in a specific way for Nagios Core. The problem was this was Nagios XI. So they hosed their Nagios XI because they were experimenting over the weekend. So this is the kind of thing that you want to do something about. You've got to get a handle on this. Again, the Bobs, don't give them access. You're going to have to control access on your Nagios server. Require training. If people need access, then you're better off as administrator to train them, to document, to baby them along, because you know what? You're going to have to fix the mess if they screw up. It's just going to happen that way. So train them. Require them to read the documents you give them. Create policies. And this one, how many of you guys have a test server? Okay, so that's about a quarter. But that's great that you guys have a test server. You got to have a test server. You got to have a test server. Stuff's going to happen, and you're going to regret it. It's one of those major components that's going to save you hours and hours of agony. Create a policy that says, hey, before we try any plugin, it must pass the test server, and everybody's satisfied with it and taking a look at it. People will gripe about that left and right, but it's going to save a lot of time and pain. Test server. So here's a new feature in the audit log, and actually what it does is it's going to record information about who logs in. So if Bob logs in, it'll say, hey, Bob just logged in. If Bob goes to the CCM and makes a change, it says Bob just made a change to the CCM. At this point in time, Bob's on this IP address. Bob's trying to do some really bad stuff. It's going to track Bob all the way. This is a nice feature, not that you want to catch people, but you want to be able to say, hey, what did you do? What exactly did you change? Because we need to change that back. So there is some accountability here with this audit log, and that's exactly why they're trying to create this information, is provide something that is going to be beneficial for tracking down those problems. Okay, abusing Nagios XI wizards. This is a problem for people wanting to take shortcuts, wanting to get stuff up. And I know that in a business situation, you have management standing over you saying, hey, listen, let's get this up, let's make this happen, let's do this quick. And you can get into a situation where you don't quite think everything through. So I want to think about three things here. And I want to look at three elements as we're talking about this. When you install Nagios, there's three things that are important: the installation, visibility, and, more important than anything else, long-term management. This is you. This is your weekends down here. So in the installation process, there's an easy way and there's a way to think about things. So let's look at some examples. So if you take a wizard and you create, and you're going to monitor a switch, maybe that's a good solution for monitoring that switch, because you've got all those ports you got to discover. The wizard does that. The wizard sets all that information up. You can set up all your metrics with that wizard, and that's okay. It's important to recognize that's okay, because with that wizard, typically you don't have 50 network devices that are the same. A lot of time those network devices are all different. So a wizard makes sense with a switch. But let's say you have 100 SQL servers. With 100 SQL servers, hey, you don't want to use the wizard. Don't even touch the wizard. Create those checks manually. So I worked with a company a couple months ago. They had lots of SQL servers. So I got the best plugin. I set up all the checks that they wanted. Manually set them up. Takes more time. Set up, they had like 30 or 40 checks for SQL servers. Set it all up. Tested it on one host. Put it all through templates. Then you can add all 100. Click, add them. They're all done. Click another 1,000. Click, you got another 1,000. You got to use the templates. You've got to realize that when you have groups of devices, immediately stop thinking about the wizards, start thinking about the templates. Because in the management end, down the road, this is what's going to save your tail. You got to think about management. So visibility, you also have to think about the people who have to see stuff. They got to get reports, the Bobs of the world. They've got to be able to see how devices are connected, and so they can understand that. That's part of the whole process that you're setting up here. And so you have to think about them when you set that up. Okay, so management, the long-term aspect, is more important than anything else. There's a template idea. Whoops, let me go back. Disregarding network relationships. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to just quickly go through some of these so you can ask some questions. Network relationships. Here, reachability. Remember that parents setting. It's plural. You've got an option with Nagios so that you can set up the relationships on the network. So here's an example. Here's this host, VZ, which is a host, and it has virtual hosts. If you set up VZ as the parents for MK, Corp, Mail, etc., when this box goes down, Nagios is smart enough to realize these are unreachable. Guess what? You don't get all the notifications for all these boxes because Nagios is smart enough to realize that. So use your parent setting to make sure that your network structure is in place to save those notifications. You don't need them. Everybody's going to hate you for it. You'll hate yourself. You'll have thousands of them. So, reachability. It's important to focus on that. If you forget one of these containers, Nagios is going to say, hey, it's down. I'm sending notifications for the whole thing. Okay, so there's the parent setting. Simple enough. There you can see the relationships. Importing infectious diseases. This, I'm going to show you one of the worst infectious diseases that happens with XI. Now, maybe this is a disease you have. I'm hoping that there's some kind of vaccination. The GUI infection. Hey, you're going to have to learn some command line stuff. You're going to have to be able to get into the Linux command line. You're going to have to be able to do backups. You're going to have to understand cron jobs. You're going to have to be able to do some analysis, some grepping of logs, troubleshooting. You don't want to learn VI in the midst of a crisis, and it's on the command line. I worked with a company recently, and they called, it was another crisis, and the administrator was a Windows administrator. They had XI, and they were working on it, and he said the worst thing that you could ever hear. He's logged in as root, he's on the Nagios box, we're troubleshooting, and he said the word that you don't ever want us to hear, oops. This is not the way to learn on your Nagios box. If you have a Nagios box, if you don't have these command line skills, this is something that you need to pay attention to, because you're going to end up using them, and they will be very beneficial for you. Another shortcut, auto-discovery. First thing I do on anybody that I do installs for, I delete auto-discovery. Because somebody will say, yeah, I want to discover, now we have 5,000 new devices with 20,000 checks and the servers just crashed. Well, it will discover everything on your network if you're not careful. Overestimating human intelligence, that's an easy thing to do. Last story, I'll give you questions then. I work with a company, and this is all about politics. Two groups of people, network guys, Windows guys. They were both learning Nagios. The Windows guys wanted Nagios XI, so they took the test server and they installed Nagios XI. The network guys installed Nagios Core. And I was teaching both because they couldn't get along because of the politics inside. I was teaching both, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And I kept looking at their configs thinking something strange. Because these guys couldn't talk politically, they both installed different Nagios servers on the same box. So one would start up, we'd get that fixed, and then it would go down because the other one would start his up. It was just a terrible mess. So, politics. I know that it happens, and it's not a pleasant experience. It's just something that you're going to have to deal with in the workplace. Okay, questions? Remember, you've got speakers that they want to talk into.
Now that Mike has thrown Bob under the bus, does anybody have any questions?
Bob deserves it.
I think I even know Bob.
Bob shouldn't be a manager. Yeah.
Mike, you're that good.
No. You guys understand what I'm saying. There's all kinds of problems. You just cover your tail and make sure that you got things covered and you'll be okay. So thanks for coming. And if you got questions later, let me know.
Nice round of applause for Mike Weber, please.